Welcome to ADHD Wise podcast. I'm Jannine Perryman, and this is a space for open conversations about ADHD and neurodiversity, bringing together lived experience, professional insights, and the questions that help us move forward. Wherever you are in your journey, you are welcome here.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining ADHD Wise podcast again. My name's Jannine Perryman, and today I am joined by the beautiful, inside and out, Becca, who is my daughter and amazing colleague. Hello, Becca.
Hello. Thank you very much for having me. I'm, feeling very excited.
Are you excited or are you nervous?
Oh, I'm nervous. Yeah, I'm not sure why, but yeah.
I think it's always nerve-wracking to come on and talk about something. I know you actually really know your stuff on this, because we're going to talk about women and girls and neurodiversity, but ADHD in particular, because that's what you did your research on. So even though you're knowledgeable, it's kind of completely understandable that you would feel anxious in this situation, because that's what we do, isn't it?
Yeah, and a bit of imposter syndrome of, I hope that I don't misspeak and say something wrong about my own research, which is obviously completely unique research, because when you do a dissertation, you become the person who knows the most about that particular topic, as is the idea.
Yeah. So you do know what you're talking about on this, but I totally understand that you're nervous. So we're just going to go through it nicely and give people what we need. Remembering that the North Star of this podcast is, what do people need to know from you right now? Okay, so that is the thing. And you know some stuff. And the reason I know you know some stuff is when I had the privilege of reading your dissertation, I found myself laughing out loud. Literally laughing out loud, because I was like, I missed that in my own daughter, which means I will have missed that with some students. It means I will have missed that clinically as well. Do you want to sort of give us an insight into sort of like what your dissertation was, and also what made you study that particular thing?
Yeah, okay, so my dissertation was, I was a psychology student, so I did pure psychology, and my research was on ADHD and gender. So it was more specifically, I was looking into people's attitudes towards gender roles and how those differ between genders and between those who have ADHD and those who don't have ADHD. With the ultimate idea that might explain some of the differences that we see in things like mental health and performance. So when you're doing research, so you look for a gap, right? You look for a gap, and I wanted to do it about neurodiversity, but ADHD specifically, I do know a bit more about than other types of neurodiversity, although I am interested in all, and just as part of my work, I've picked up a lot. So that's what I wanted to do. And so I had a look at the research, and researchers generally speaking all agreed that there was an issue with not having studied women and girls enough. So that's what I ended up looking into. And I happened to stumble across a paper which I was really, really interested in, which was, it was the inspiration for my research. But it was about how couples where one has ADHD and one doesn't have ADHD, how they have really, really different gender roles, gender role attitudes. And I thought that was so interesting, and I was really curious why, and there was no research on it other than that at all. So I did it about just people in general rather than couples, to see whether women with ADHD would have more, I'm going to use the wording I used in my research, which was egalitarian and traditional values. As opposites of that spectrum. So my hypothesis was that women with ADHD would have the most egalitarian attitudes, and men with ADHD would have the most traditional gender role attitudes. And I had, very limited people and that kind of thing, but it was very, very interesting research. And so much of the benefit that I got from that was understanding other people's research, learning what there is about ADHD and gender. And I tell you what, not very much, all things considered. So that was why I did what I did and what made me interested. And yet it taught me a lot, which I would like to share with you.
Okay. Can you define egalitarian, please?
It usually means equal. So in all things, but in this context, meaning egalitarian gender attitudes, meaning men and women being equal, being the same, should be treated the same. So there were all of these different items that I used to decide whether or not someone had egalitarian or traditional attitudes. So traditional is then the opposite of egalitarian in this situation. So traditional gender roles, meaning that we're very different.
Okay, so egalitarian meaning sort of where there's sort of like flexibility in this, whereas traditional is there's a kind of like a set, men do this, women do this, like the blue jobs and the pink jobs kind of thing. Is that, have I got that right? Have I not got that right?
Yeah, and it was across all sorts of domains. But one example would be like, do you agree or disagree that that men should be responsible for earning an income for a family? So the egalitarian would strongly disagree that that's a man's role, and the traditional would strongly agree that that's the man's role.
So what did you find with regards to that and ADHD?
Well, I didn't conclusively come to anything, because obviously my research was scientific research, so there was a lot of stats to it in the end, which I won't bore you with, but I had a very limited number of people I was allowed to study because of, ethics of research and all that kind of thing. But it certainly aligned with the other researchers that ADHD women had more egalitarian gender attitudes than ADHD men, and that there may be significant differences between ADHD men and men who don't have ADHD, and ADHD women and women who don't have ADHD.
So there was, hang on, so just to clarify, there's differences between the non-ADHD and the ADHD as well?
That's the idea, yeah. So my hypothesis was basically, so the reason that I thought this might happen based on the research I did was that women and girls internalise a lot, generally speaking, and men and boys less so. They'll sort of externalise. So the research that I was looking at found that women and girls felt that they belonged in the generalisations. So they viewed themselves as less capable of being leaders and how they should be more responsible and that kind of thing, whereas men don't view themselves that way. So my hypothesis was that women and girls having these expectations on them, when they have ADHD, those would be really difficult to manage. Things like, obviously, a woman's role traditionally has been to keep a home and that kind of thing, and ADHD women would find that a lot more difficult. So the idea was that would then make them go, no, I don't agree with that, because that doesn't suit me. That's not my experience of the world. Whereas for men with ADHD, where they struggle with that, they might think, oh, well, that's because I'm a man. That's not my role. That was the idea that I was sort of running with, well, trying to figure out if that might be a reason for that discrepancy.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so then looking at the wider research and the things that made me chuckle when I was reading, well, not just chuckle, that's understating it, I laughed out loud, was because there were some things around what we considered to be hyperactivity, for example, and what we think of as hyperactivity in males and what we think about as hyperactivity in girls. And as my daughter, I completely missed your hyperactivity until I read an explanation of it that had completely passed me by because I wasn't aware of my own bias. Do you want to go there with what that was?
So the research that I was able to find about this topic, basically there are all sorts of different explanations. So we all know it's a sort of like a widely accepted fact, and it is backed up by the research that girls are less likely to be identified when they have ADHD than boys. But there seem to be several reasons for that. One of which being that girls may present in a way that is less problematic in the classroom environment. So they're not causing a problem to others. So it might go unnoticed. So like the stereotype of girls are more likely to be daydreamers, whereas the boys are more likely to be, bouncing around and not able to sit still. So there's that explanation of it. But actually, what I found was a much more interesting explanation is that they did an observational study, I think it was, where they found that actually when they looked objectively at these boys' behaviour and the girls' behaviour, they were doing the same thing, but the girls' behaviour was not seen as being the same as the boys' behaviour. So it was almost like because they thought, well, girls shouldn't be like that, it just wasn't noticed at all. The way that looking in front of you right now, you don't see your own nose because your brain is blocking it out, because that's what your brain thinks to do. But if you look, you can see it. And so that was the idea that these researchers came to, was that actually the same behaviour is not perceived the same, and there actually might not be very much difference between the behaviours, but instead it's the way that we perceive it that's different.
So sort of like become behaviour blind, like we can, they talk about nose blind when you can't smell, sort of, this is what inhaler smell so often you don't notice it anymore. Is it a bit like is it a bit behaviour blind when you might not notice, I don't know, a girl get up and constantly move around in the classroom would be viewed differently to a boy doing the same thing?
Yeah, you probably seek to find different explanations, because so much of sort of the foundations of psychology is something that we call a schema, which is not a very complicated thing. But a schema just means like a building block in your brain, your thoughts, and your brain thinks that's really important. And I will make decisions based on that information. I will think things based on that information. And it's all about your worldview. So if you think boys are, like particularly younger boys are, they're rowdier and they're noisier and they're more aggressive, then that's what you're likely to see, because it's what you think you'll see. And so when you see a girl constantly getting up and going to the toilet or whatever, you might think that it's for a different reason than if a boy was doing it. You might think, oh, well, he's being disruptive because he's got ADHD, so he can't possibly sit down. Whereas a girl, you might be like, oh, well, maybe it's just she's just having a bit of a difficult time, or, maybe she just needs lots of wheeze, whatever. So it's just seen differently, even though it's the same behaviour.
The thing that made me laugh was I realised that I had completely missed your hyperactivity. So, for example, reading your stuff kind of hit me around the same time as I saw something from somebody else. And what somebody else was saying, which tied very much into what you're also saying, the observation was actually at, I think it was Warwick Castle, or it was Hampton Court Palace. And this person was out with their own children because they had children who are not in school. So they were out with their own children, but they are themselves professional. And they had picked up that there was this group of children, the boys were doing a bit of roundhousing, and the girls were doing cartwheels and handstands. The boys were stopped, the girls were not. And I was reading your research around the same time, because actually, is there less risk with roundhousing than there is with handstands and cartwheels in terms of somebody being kicked in the face and whatever else? This I just found completely fascinating, because you didn't ever actually, when I think about it, when there was an opportunity to be doing a handstand or a cartwheel, that's what you were doing. And I just thought you were taking your gymnastics seriously, which you were, but you were also managing, I think, I can now reflect that you were managing your activity, your regulation, you're regulating yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And even in the classroom, obviously I wasn't doing handstands and things in the classroom, but in an attempt to regulate, I realised that I could get up whenever I wanted. If it was because I was offering to hand something out, or to go and sharpen some pencils, to take the register, then I was allowed to leave, then I was allowed to move around, then I was allowed to be freely sort of, meeting my own physical activity needs. And actually one of the reasons that wasn't seen as a problem was because I was able to do my work faster than the other children in lessons. So there is partly the gendered aspect. There's partly the aspect that I knew that if I was doing it to be helpful, then that would be well received. And there was also the aspect of, because it wasn't causing any difficulty with my academics, no one saw it as a problem. So no one would have even noticed, let alone thought it was an issue, I would imagine.
You found a socially acceptable way of meeting your own needs that probably isn't as available to boys, because from what you're saying is that if a boy was suddenly saying, oh, can I hand out the pens? Can I sharpen the pencils? Can I do this? Can I do that? It would be viewed differently to a girl asking the same question, particularly a girl who is of the more academic type.
Yeah, I think so. Particularly because boys with ADHD are often, so they're sort of characterized and stereotyped as being, there's the naughty aspect, but there's also the aspect of like, oh, well, even if you know that they have ADHD, they're still in control a little bit and it's on purpose or whatever. And so if they then offer to do something, it might be that the teacher thinks, oh, well, what's the intent behind that? Why are you doing that? Because I think these boys don't get the opportunity in a way to learn that kind of skill because they're always in trouble. And so one of the reasons that I became such a great masker for the ADHD when I was a child is because both my twin brother and my older sister showed these behaviours, but particularly my twin brother, and he was always in trouble, always. And it seemed horrible. So I just was desperate not to have that same judgment cast on me. And so that's why I found these socially acceptable ways to behave. And I didn't always manage it, but generally speaking, day to day, I wasn't causing a problem in the classroom. But I was having real difficulty by the time I got to secondary school. But I was fine in primary school, but that was because the demand was low. And so I would say that's probably more of an academic inclination thing. Because obviously some kids are going to thrive at school, some aren't. And I did thrive academically. But when it became more difficult and when more was expected of me socially and in terms of, things like self-care and organisation, that's when I started to really struggle. So there's all sorts of elements that impact whether or not a child is picked up. So I talk about the gender aspect, I research the gender aspect, but there are many more, and that's all something I also explored in my dissertation because it's very interesting.
It is very interesting, and thank you for sharing the bit around your twin brother, my son, because he was always in trouble, and it was actually really, really hard to break that cycle and to get him to like himself and to get others to like him. And I think that if he had stood up and said, "Oh, can I hand out the books?" I think that he would have been told, "No, Bill, sit down." Because they would have wanted to try to control him in that situation because they didn't know what was going to come next, when conversely they allowed that with you and generally speaking with women and girls.
Yeah, absolutely. And, the way that Will was spoken about to me by adults, and by adults I mostly mean teachers, but also other adults in our lives, is honestly, it's unacceptable. And I feel like I hope it's not so common now. But particularly because he wasn't actually diagnosed for a fair while. Because so I'm 23, so my twin brother's also obviously 23.
He was 11 when he was diagnosed, so he's now 23. So yeah, that was, and you weren't picked up. Well, you were picked up by me and by yourself prior to, but we didn't actually manage to get you diagnosed. Were you 15 or 16 when you were diagnosed in the end?
I think I was 16. I'm pretty sure.
We had quite the battle. And that was a gender-related issue as well, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. The Senko at my school, I went to her and said about it, and she said many, many things, a lot of which I won't go into, but the gender aspect is that she said, so her husband has ADHD, and so her view on what ADHD should look like was that of a middle-aged man. And I was a 16-year-old girl, so she blamed it on my hormones and all of these kinds of things. And she was insistent that there was no way. And she went as far as to lie to a psychiatrist. To my GP when they asked what my other teachers thought about it. And she said, well, I've spoken to them all, and they all said that she doesn't have it. And I asked them, and they said, she's never spoken to us. We would have said that you absolutely do show signs of that. And I was so shocked by that behaviour, but it was that she saw what she wanted to see. She saw a teenage girl. I'd been struggling with my mental health because of the difficulty I was having. I do believe a lot of it was the undiagnosed ADHD and stuff, with, GCSEs. But she saw that, and she therefore saw what she wanted to see, and was very, very unkind about the whole thing, obviously. Fortunately, I was able to get diagnosed before my GCSEs, so there was some support, but not as much as I would have liked. But I still did relatively well. But because I wasn't causing issues in the classroom, no one was really bothered. But I had a couple of teachers who I was quite close to. Again, because, I did things like offer to hand things out and all of that kind of thing. So it made it quite easy to get on with my teachers. And they were like, oh no, I really do see that for you. And yeah, so that's that. Otherwise I never would have even thought to ask them. Did she ask you?
Yeah, and I think sometimes we have to remember that what the adults in our lives teach us is how not to behave. And I'm going to say, as kindly as I possibly can, that this particular individual, this particular professional taught us how not to behave as professionals, right? To challenge things and to really think about things. So I think a lot of the reason, well, I would assume, but do correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of the reason you chose to do this particular research was because of the struggle that you had yourself. So this sort of like facilitates you making things better for future generations, because we can actually recognise what hyperactivity looks like in girls, for example.
Yeah, absolutely. We see now this pushback against this sort of crisis about the overdiagnosing problem. Overdiagnosing is in quote marks for anyone just listening. But the reason is, part of the research that I did was finding out who is now being diagnosed and why that might be. And professionals, generally speaking, they agree. A lot of it is just that women are realising in their adulthood, this is why I've struggled my whole life. I see. Why did no one pick this up for me? And so we know partly why. And it seems like that's a lot of the reason. It's just that girls are now being picked up as children, and women are realising as adults that they can actually, that they can understand what's going on with them and what's always been going on with them.
Because I was 41 when I was diagnosed with ADHD. And actually, I think, well, definitely, I know that if things had been picked up sooner, my life would have been probably better. There were some mistakes I made and some situations I found myself in that I probably wouldn't have found myself in if I'd understood myself and liked myself actually sooner. And so I think that you and I are both big advocates for actually being assessed and understanding these things. But there is a huge barrier to assessments. And I think that as people became more aware, of course it was going to be the case that there was a higher demand on the diagnostic pathways. Of course there was, because you just doubles the amount of people that would be available, that would want to look at it each, on a month by month basis. But because this is backlog of women and girls, we've seen what we have seen. And also there were a lot of males who have struggled so far and were also recognising, actually, this is probably me, this probably explains some stuff for me. So I think that we it's not really all that surprising that we've seen a massive uptake in the demand for assessments, because people deserve to know, and because women and girls have been completely ignored, and so have compliant boys. So the ones who are not causing a problem, we're not being highlighted. But we are seeing a pushback now to those stereotypes, to those very, very, very rigid diagnostic criteria. We're seeing a pushback to all of that, which I'm really worried about. And I'm sure you are too, because I think that's going to push women and girls back into the process of not being able to get recognised and not being able to therefore understand themselves and find support for themselves.
You talked about the North Star of this podcast at the beginning. And the North Star for my research was that a big part of what I noticed was that there is a mental health gap between women with ADHD and men with ADHD and women with ADHD and women without ADHD. Women with ADHD have worse mental health outcomes. Significantly worse. So that much more than is the difference between men with ADHD and men without ADHD. It's a much bigger gap. And so much of that, I hypothesize, is because we feel so much shame about what we feel we should be able to do. We are judged more harshly on a lot of things. And so that was something I wrote about. And it causes really, really significant issues because there's nothing you can do about it. You can't shame yourself into being any different than you are. And part of the reason that the ability to access diagnosis, if it's the path you want to take. So for me, medication has been life-changing. So many people don't want to go on it, and that's totally understandable. But for me, it's made such a big difference in just that I can then do what I want to do. I can think about what I want to do and then I can do it. So I needed that because I don't have that pressure otherwise to build that dopamine in me. So if I had a physical job or something, I wouldn't require it. But
like your twin brother does.
Exactly. And that really helps him to regulate himself. And when I was at school, I largely didn't actually need medication because obviously there was someone there whose job it was to keep me on task. But if I had struggled more with the learning, I definitely would have struggled more to pay attention. But I was paying attention because I was interested. And if you're not interested, then I can imagine how difficult that would be for these kids. And it makes me really upset to think that some of them won't be getting the support that they need and deserve because we've manufactured a problem, a fake problem. We've invented one.
Which we don't need to be doing. There's big enough problems without actually inventing more.
That's what I think.
Okay, so just going to sort of like flip back to something that you said, and I was trying to hold it, and I've now got to. If I don't say it now, I'm gonna lose it. You were talking about those gender roles and the shame associated with them. As a woman, I am expected to remember birthdays, dates, appointments, etc. I'm expected to be better at those things than men are. As a woman, I'm supposed to be, and I'm absolutely not, because my time blindness is actually disabling. I mean, Becca, you work with me. How bad is my time? How bad is my time blindness? It's quite profound. My time blindness is quite profound. And time blindness is not just minutes of the day or how long things take. It is date blindness as well. So that's an extension of it. And I remember a close family member that it did matter to me having telling me that they no longer wanted me in their life because I clearly didn't care about them or their children because of my lateness with birthday cards. So this is a family member for who I'm bothered about, and I remember feeling just gutted and knowing he was wrong and that it was not a reflection that I didn't care, but also having no explanation for that back then. And I remember the guilt and the shame and the loss and the feeling misunderstood. And I remember feeling that really very, very painfully. And then getting my ADHD diagnosis and then kind of like realising, Jannine, you need to be easier on yourself with regards to this, because not everyone's innate ability to recognise, perceive, hold, date, time in mind is the same. You are on the back foot before you started. Just because people think women are good at these things, you're not, and you're never going to be. There are things that you're going to do. You're going to have to do this manually because it's gone. It's not there for you. And then I had another family member who is now an ex-family member. So this is my ex-mother-in-law, and I'm glad that she's my ex-mother-in-law. So we were right about that. Who said I wasn't a proper woman because I didn't remember birthdays. Now there's gender stereotyping for you, but I just genuinely cannot do it. And I'm so lucky actually, because Andy, who is my other half, he's really good with dates. He's really good with time. I drive him nuts. And he drives me nuts in return for different reasons. But I can't do it. And so if we're going and we're doing anything, we have to really talk about the timing and what he's expecting of me and what I'm going to need in order to be able to achieve the timing that he said. And he needs to say accurately. I'm not somebody you can say, oh, we're leaving at 2:00 if we're not really actually leaving until 1:15. Because that will work with me once. It won't work with me after that, because I'll be like, well, I don't trust you now. So I need people to actually say what they mean what they say, because if there's kind of like too much move on that, it doesn't work for me anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. The thing with the dates, I lost a friend because I'd forgotten her birthday, and it had obviously really upset her, and she'd never mentioned it, and we were very, very close. So that still upsets me now that happened, and it makes me very sad that hurt her. I think she now understands that, and that friendship was obviously not meant to be if that's something that's always going to upset her. I am actually pretty good at remembering birthdays usually. I think that's why it was such an issue, because I really try. But even when you really try, you still sometimes miss them. And
well, it's like colourblindness, isn't it? If you're colourblind, you're always going to be colourblind. If you're time blind, you're always going to be time blind.
Well, yeah, quite. And I think in comparison to both my twin brother and my partner now, so my partner's diagnosed autistic. I think he definitely has ADHD, but he hasn't been assessed. But the way that they feel about their obligations to people, say at Christmas time, or to, obviously me and my brother have the same parents, and I celebrate, Mother's Day and Father's Day on behalf of my partner's parents as well. And neither of them think to do anything. But I always would, and I would feel really guilty about that. But they're like, oh, it's fine. It's fine. And it's the difference in how you feel about it that creates a big part of the issue. So that was so much of what I researched, is that I think that causes a lot of the distress that we experience. And so I worry about women not being able to access diagnosis, and girls not being able to access diagnosis and feeling there's something wrong with them, because there's nothing wrong with them. They're just different, and that's fine.
And if you understand what the problem is, you can do something about supporting that problem. If you don't understand what the problem is, you just feel like you're a rubbish human.
Exactly. And you're not a rubbish human. You're a lovely human. And getting my ADHD diagnosis made such a big difference to my self-esteem. I largely stopped having the mental health difficulties that I was having after, like, almost immediately after being diagnosed with ADHD, because I knew what was going on. It's like, oh, I see. And sometimes I do still obviously struggle with shame and whatever, because everybody does. But I have something where I can go, okay, I get it. I get why that's happened. And that's really important. And it's never an excuse for me, because you still have to obviously try your best. And everyone makes mistakes, regardless of being neurodivergent or not. Everyone will occasionally forget someone's birthday also. Like, that's obviously not an exclusive to us thing. But it's the fact that no matter how hard you try, you're always going to struggle a lot more with those things.
It is, because it's chronic and pervasive. So when we sort of say that everybody can have those things at times, and that we're not sort of saying, and we don't subscribe to the, oh, everyone's a little bit autistic, or oh, everyone's a little bit ADHD. We don't subscribe to that at all, because to get a diagnosis for, say, autism or for ADHD, you have to have met a really high threshold. Actually, the threshold for ADHD, the diagnostic criteria is tight and it's high in order to get an ADHD diagnosis. So if someone has an ADHD diagnosis, then they have chronic and pervasive difficulties. A clinician has looked at their case and they have said, this person benefits from having a diagnosis, because without it, they're going to continue to struggle with this, and this. With it, they may be able to secure some support for this or this. And so chronic and pervasive is the language around that. So recognising people that just because we're saying that everybody can forget things, sometimes people can lose track of time, can struggle to estimate time, can overshoot, can undershoot. That's not the same thing as saying everybody is a little bit time blind. We are saying that little bit of insight that you have when you've got that timing wrong is an indication of what it is like. But if you think about what it's like for somebody, if that's their way of living, that's who they are. They are fundamentally that person who is not holding time well, versus how you might be when you're under stress, or when you're enjoying something or hating something and time gets away from you.
Yeah, occasionally being late to a social gathering because you've misjudged the time is really frustrating. Imagine that being the case when you like need to go to the toilet between meetings at work, or you've gone to get a cup of tea and then you realise you've been 15 minutes because you've just forgotten that the kettle was done. And so you've just disappeared. And that constant having to be so vigilant, because if you're not, you'll forget. And even if you are, you'll still sometimes forget. It's really stressful. So for me, with time blindness, because I feel so anxious about being late, I'll just get ready first thing in the morning. So I'm ready all day. And because if I don't, then I will be late. I can guarantee I will be late. If I leave it to how long I think, plus a significant amount of leeway, I will still not be ready on time.
They talk about waiting mode, don't they? It's like if you've got an appointment at 3:00, you might well find you're paralysed all day long. I think we've learned how to navigate that. And part of that is actually get ready, put everything there, and then move your way through it and use other people to sort of get you back into doing things and set loads of timers. So we're, I think, quite equipped to it. But lots of people say they're in waiting mode. And I can certainly be like that sometimes, where it's just like, I daren't do anything else.
And I do get that. But a big part of the thing for me with having to try so hard not to be late is because if I'm going somewhere with my partner and we show up late, everyone's going to assume it's my fault because I'm dressed nice and I have makeup on and whatever. But I feel like I have to. I feel like that's what I'm meant to do as a woman. Obviously, I put my jewelry on, but I know that people will assume that I'm the one who's late because it looks like I've taken more time to get ready, even if it wasn't me. So I try really hard.
Yeah, these are again gender stereotypes, aren't they? So if somebody came round and your flat was in a mess, it would be you who'd feel the judgment, not your partner.
That was originally going to be the thing for my research, but I unfortunately couldn't do the methodology I wanted to do. But yeah, exactly that, because of that bias. And so, I'll be cleaning and like my partner will be like, why do you feel like you need to? I'm like, because when people come here, you don't feel like a problem with that because they won't judge you, but they will judge me. It's like, they're not going to judge. I'm like, yes, they will. Yes, they will.
So
because that's
going
just
full circle. Yeah, no, you're right. But going full circle to what you said at the beginning, which even though I've looked at this research with you, it's still a difficult concept in terms of people being able to see things and not see things. I'm wondering if that might be the ideal example, actually, that you would look at a boy's bedroom, which could be a mess, and because you're expecting it to be a mess, you don't notice it is a mess. Whereas you look at a girl's bedroom, which might be less messy, but you'll look at it and you'll notice that it's mess.
Yeah, that was the research that actually inspired me to look at gender differences. And then obviously I was also looking at ADHD, but yeah, I was shown that piece of research, I think in one of my seminars, and it was that people do perceive the exact same room as significantly more messy if it's a woman's room than if it's a man's room. But also, as well as thinking, oh, the room's more messy, they have very negative views comparatively on the people.
And that'll be why we've got bigger issues with mental health than our male counterparts.
Yeah.
And with the rest of the population. So we're at higher risk of mental health outcomes. Is there anything that males are at higher risk of?
With ADHD?
According to your research? Yeah.
Males with ADHD are still more likely to have mental health difficulties and stuff than their non-ADHD counterparts, so men without ADHD. So I'm trying not to be too sciencey, but also trying to explain it properly. But yeah, the men also have their difficulties, and we've talked actually quite a bit about that, about how I do feel that for men and boys, they're often not actually given the opportunity to learn very important skills because everyone's just decided that actually it's too much of a pain to teach them and help them to learn, and it's almost like they're a lost cause. And I really resent that. Like I was saying about the way that Will was spoken about to me as his sister, and I was always very defensive of that because I was like, why are you saying that to me like that? I'm not someone who is just going to listen to you talk to him like that, because we were very close actually. But I remember our PE teacher, she was his form tutor, but my PE teacher, she said to me, I'd forgotten my PE kit, and I did so very rarely because I always had my PE kit. So I was always carrying my PE kit, even if I didn't have PE, because otherwise I knew I'd forget it. So it had to just be in my bag. And so when I did forget it, she would say to me, "Oh, well, it's a shame to see you acting just like your brother," and things like that. And I was like, that's so judgmental and mean. Like, it's just not nice, because he was only like 12. He was just a 12-year-old boy with ADHD struggling, and she knew that. And yeah, that judgment, I still remember how that felt. Not just that it was negative to me, but also that they thought that being like him would make me bad. And I was like, that's horrible.
And that would be the last thing that you would want. But actually, you did say at the beginning of this, the last thing you would want was to be treated like him. But what you didn't say was that the last thing that you would want was to be like him. But you just realised that you didn't want to be treated like him, so you modified your behaviour in order to not have that happen, which is quite sad, really, isn't it? He wasn't treated right. He wasn't treated well. And that isn't okay. So, staying sort of having high expectations for your children, but recognizing that you might have to put different support in place. Having high expectations for yourself, but realizing that you might need to do things differently, because there'll come a point in your life where you can't just work harder to achieve the same or less. So it's like learning to work differently, learning to work your ADHD your way. Not deciding that not having lower expectations of a boy, and not having lower expectations of a girl in certain areas, and noticing what hyperactivity looks like. Because for you, how would you still now describe your hyperactivity?
I feel like I have an extremely hyperactive brain, which is something I think a lot of people with ADHD, and maybe more so women with ADHD, will really relate to. It's just that it's unbearable. It's just constant. So I'm not medicated today. So it really is quite something. And I just feel like I constantly need to move. But I actually am often quite paralysed physically, because my brain's telling me to go physically do so many things at once that I actually can't move from the spot I'm rooted to. And then when I am up, it is non-stop. So I have POTS, which is a heart condition. So I'm not really meant to be stood for long periods of time. It makes me feel really poorly. But when I'm up, I just go. I go. It drives my partner nuts. Like a tornado ripping around the house, and yeah, it's like you're just so restless. But I am really restless, and I feel, or it's almost like guilt, but it's not quite guilt. But it's a similar feeling about being sat, that I feel like I'm doing something wrong and that there's something I should be doing. I always feel like I'm forgetting to be physically doing something, and so I'm always physically doing everything I can, and it's really hard.
So there's social expectation in there, but there's also sort of like your biological function of needing to move a lot. So it's like, I feel like I will sit now and then we'll get off this call, for example, and we'll probably have a bit of a chit chat afterwards. And then we'll both need to just kind of regulate by getting up and moving around, which actually is healthy for everybody. But the need is higher for ADHD because movement creates dopamine, and dopamine makes it possible for us to function better. So, yeah. Okay, Becca, is there anything else you would like to add before we finish this particular podcast episode?
I'd just like to say thank you to everyone listening. It's been really fun actually talking about my research, because like I don't actually get that much opportunity to do it. I'm extremely proud of my dissertation. I wouldn't usually say this, but I'm going to, because I'm really proud of it. I got an 82 on my dissertation, which is the highest I'd ever heard of anyone receiving on an undergraduate dissertation. I was so extremely shocked when I saw the grade, but I worked really, really hard on it because I am very, very passionate about this subject. Both neurodiversity and ADHD and gender and how that affects people. Obviously, everyone's experiences are really different, but as much as we can, while obviously having to make generalizations, this is how I feel it is for me and for so many of the women I know and for so many of the men I know. And it was a real privilege to get to look into it and to have people be interested. And the fact that I've got to show people it and they've read it and they've enjoyed it and got something out of it means so much to me, because that's all you can ever really ask for. So thank you for letting me talk about it.
You're totally welcome. And thank you, Becca. I should probably get you to write at least a blog. If you're not prepared to put the whole research up, perhaps you could write a blog about it and pop it on the website for people. Because I think that it would be really good for people to understand that the way we perceive things is sometimes narrowed by what we're expecting to see. And that hyperactivity in girls can look completely different to how you're expecting it to see. And boys get mistreated too. And that diagnostic assessments it's not really as surprising that there was an upsurge. And I don't think that was even a problem, even if there wasn't the capacity to meet the need. We could have increased the capacity, but instead we decided to demonise everybody, particularly women. So we're not fans of that particular outcome, and we're going to keep banging that drum. Thank you very much, Becca. It's very brave of you to share that, and I'm grateful that you did, and I hope people are also grateful that you did. And thank you for listening, and we'll see you on another episode.
Thank you for listening to ADHD Wise podcast. ADHD Wise exists to help bridge understanding and support for people exploring ADHD and broader neurodiversity. If you would like to know more about us and our services, please visit www.adhdwise.uk. Follow ADHD Wise UK on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok and LinkedIn. Take care, and we'll see you next time.